Morning, everyone. Happy end of term, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Deputy Political Editor, Ben Glaze. Morning, Ben.
Hello, good morning.
We're going to take you through the biggest stories of the day, and through it all, we want you to ask us your questions. You can take part. This is the People's Paper Review, so dig into the comments and ask us whatever's burning a hole in your head, and we'll do our best to help you through it. Now, what have we got today? Well, on a day when some people in the media are more worried about a comparatively small number of people coming off boats, despite the fact the government was told ages ago this would be happening, the Mirror is splashing on a much larger number of children who are off school, despite the fact the government was told ages ago this would also be happening. Absence rates at school hit 14% last week, with 934,000 children isolating due to a possible contact, and only 5% of them with a confirmed case of COVID. And this is being blamed on a pingdemic, but isn't the real reason for this to do with the fact that the coronavirus infection is being allowed to just let rip?
That's right. Well, one affects the other, doesn't it? Because if you've got 50,000 daily infections, which is what we're up to at the moment, on course, scientists reckon for about 100,000 a day in the next couple of weeks. Because each infection, each confirmed case generates about 2 contacts who are forced to self-isolate. The more diagnosed infections you get, the more number of people will be forced into self-isolation, this so-called pingdemic that we're experiencing. And of course, the kids aren't vaccinated by and large. So whilst they're still mixing in schools and a lot of them aren't masked now, they're obviously spreading infection amongst each other. Now, medically, that's not a massive deal because children are very, very, very unlikely to get seriously ill or indeed die from coronavirus. What happens, though, is that they're forced into self-isolation, their close contacts are forced into self-isolation, and these figures that came out yesterday showing that over 1 million kids are now or were off school at the end of last week. I mean, they're quite stunning facts, actually. So there's 934,000 children isolating as possible close contacts. There's 47,200 confirmed cases. So that's 47,000 kids with coronavirus, 34,500 with suspected coronavirus, and 34,800 are off as a result of school closures forced by coronavirus. Then factor in as well that anecdotally we're hearing of families who are taking their kids out of school because what they don't want is for the kids or indeed the parents to get pinged and have to spend 10 days locked up because they got their holidays planned, because summer holidays are coming up and everyone, assuming people aren't going abroad, they're off to Devon, Cornwall, Norfolk, the lakes, wherever. They've paid hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds for cottages, caravans, campsites. They don't want to lose that money because they've been pinged as close contacts with their children and then have to stay at home and can't go on holiday and lose that cash. So yeah, some kids being taken out of school to avoid their families having to miss their school holidays. So it's not an ideal situation at all for the kids this week.
No. And of course, some of the people who might be taking their children out of school against the rules, to avoid getting pinged, are also perhaps low-paid workers who don't want to have to isolate at home with children, or they don't have childcare options or anything like that, and they can't take the time off work. So the figures are actually expected to be higher this week. There'll be more than 1 million children off school this week. Mine is her end of term today, so tomorrow's going to be a lion, hooray. But with the long summer holidays, perhaps not being quite the firework the Prime Minister was hoping for, because he's gone and lifted all these restrictions, which mean the infection is quite rampant, it's now expected, isn't it, to be just as bad in September when they all go back. So, Ben, what are the predictions? Let me just ask Becky's question first. It's all to do with cramped classrooms, not enough social distancing in schools, poor levels of testing, no masks, poor ventilation. The problem here is who's talking about CEV and CV kids who are risking their lives every day having to go into virus-filled schools. I don't know quite what CEV and CV stand for.
That's clinically extremely vulnerable and clinically vulnerable kids.
Thank you. I knew someone else would be on top of these things. So yes, there are children going to poorly ventilated schools. There's not much talk about ventilation being important, full stop, for anybody. And there's very low levels of testing. Schools don't have the cash to pay for some of this stuff. They haven't been given any cash by the government. But so what are the predictions then for September, Ben? It's going to be just as bad or better? Will we be over it by September?
We're expecting, obviously, cases to continue rising over the summer because we had the step 4 relaxations that came into effect on Monday. So that, for example, means you can order a pint at the bar, something I actually did last night for the first time in 16 months. So no perspex around the bar. You don't have to wear a mask in some pubs, and you can go up and order like in the good old days at the bar. If this carries on, obviously over the next 6 weeks, then come start of September, there is likely to be higher rates of cases than we currently have, and obviously the kids will be going back to school in September. And Becky's point there about ventilation in classrooms, that's a very good one, because that's a point that the teaching unions are making, saying we need more ventilation. And of course, it's not simply a case of opening the windows, which is all very well when it's absolutely baking hot, as it has been for the past few days. But of course, as we go into September and October and autumn and then winter, you're not wanting to open those windows because it's going to be cold.
Well, the unions
so the unions are saying you've got to do more to ventilate some other way rather than simply opening the windows, which obviously won't work as we go into winter. And also, you've got to think as well, the government's come under fire in the past couple of months over its handling of how it's dealing with coronavirus in schools and the longer term effects on children and their education. It was only a few weeks ago, of course, that the catch-up czar, Sir Kevin Collins, resigned because he wanted a £15 billion catch-up plan. And the Treasury said, well, you're not having £15 billion, you can have £1.5 billion instead. So Boris Johnson obviously said, whatever it takes, we'll catch the children up, we'll make sure that the cash is in place. And then when it came to writing the checks, he wrote one for a tenth of what was being asked for. So yeah, government under a lot of pressure from unions, from families, from teachers, into what they are going to do for children. And with kids shut up as well at home in self-isolation, I mean, the school holidays are coming. It's not just that kids will be going on holiday with their families and now might not be able to. It's the going out with your mates. It's the playing football in the park. It's going for a wander around the local lake.
It's trying to get out of the house to do something and be somewhere else while you're doing whatever it is you're doing.
And we've written lots of times about we don't want kids holed up in their bedrooms playing Call of Duty or Fortnite or FIFA or whatever. Now the weather's good, they want to be out and about mixing. If you get pinged, you can't. You have to stay in.
Which in a heat wave isn't ideal either. No. I keep asking us your questions, everybody. Let us know what you think about this. Mark says, how many of these are actually true positive results? The 5%, the 47,000 out of that 943,000. The lateral flow tests aren't exactly good indications. They can be faked into giving a positive response. Why does the government still trust these tests when they're nowhere near 100% accurate? Ben, they have had some problems with false negatives and false positives. So why is there so much faith being put in these tests when they're a bit tricky?
The lateral flow tests are currently the best way, the government says, for mass testing. So, I assume quite a few people watching this will have done them. I know when I had to go to the G7 last month, we had to do tests every day. They're easy to use once you've got the hang of it. And they do give you the results in 15 minutes. The Prime Minister called it, like a pregnancy-style test. You get the results. I don't know quite what the chap refers to when he says it's easy to fake a positive result. I'm not entirely sure how that is. I mean, you do report the result yourself on the internet. So if you wanted to lie about it, you could. I'm not sure what there'd be to gain by saying you've got a positive result. Obviously, you could. The opposite applies, and you could lie and say you've got a negative result when actually it was positive.
There have been claims that kids faked tests with lemon juice or something in order to get off school, I think, but it actually turned out to be one of those urban myths. It didn't work. A bit like telling your mum you've got a temperature when you put the thermometer in your armpit or on the bedside light or something like that. You didn't ET. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and it's quite.
You're not.
Well, urban myth, but also, I mean, it's quite a sophisticated way, in inverted commas, for children to bunk off, I suppose. Children
are very sophisticated. Come on, Ben. Yeah. Come on. We've all done it. Now then, now keep asking us your questions. What do you think about the end of term? I mean, it has only been sort of a couple of days since the end of restrictions finally, from this so-called Boris Johnson is free of restrictions day on Monday. But obviously the infections have been rising steadily for a while, and then now they seem to be going quite mad. And he's hoping, I would imagine, that the August bank holiday is going to provide this fire break and the infections will slow down a little bit. And obviously, when children aren't in Eton, they don't see each other. So, because they all go home to the daddy's south of France mansion or something. So that's how he thinks the school holidays work. Now, Kerry says, we're isolating. My daughter's caught COVID from school. We're sick as a chip. She's sick as a chip. Lovely. She's gutted. She can't go out with her friends at 15. It's awful. And this raises the question of vaccinations, doesn't it? Because there have been, anecdotally, sort of 16, 17-year-olds who don't have vulnerabilities turning up at vaccination centres, saying, please jab me. Because I've got someone in my family, or I just want to have all this over. I want to be safer and all the rest of it. And the government is still very reluctant to vaccinate them. It would appear to be perhaps a way around this if they could persuade JCVI.
Early this week, the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, and the government, that's an independent body that advises the government on who to vaccinate. And for weeks and weeks, they've been looking at whether or not to vaccinate children. Earlier this week, they recommended that children approaching their 18th birthday, so those who are 17 and 11 months, for example, that they should be vaccinated because the defense will kick in. It takes 2 to 3 weeks, obviously, post-vaccination for it to become effective in your system. So they recommended that they should be vaccinated, and also other children aged 12 and over who are particularly vulnerable. Now, a lot of those will have been jabbed anyway, as clinically vulnerable, but they're particularly recommending it now. So what they are stopping short of, and which some particularly conservative MPs want, is mass vaccination of secondary school age children. Now, it's a very emotive subject, this, and various government scientists are wrestling with it, because is it ethical, first of all, to stick needles in children's arms? Well, we do it for babies on various jabs. We also do it for children at different stages in their childhood. But with corona, the evidence so far shows any children catching it are very, very unlikely to get seriously ill, even less likely to die. And of course, there are some side effects for some people to having the jab itself. So at the moment, they've decided not to vaccinate en masse children. There's data coming in from places like America where they've taken the decision to vaccinate some children, and we'll be watching to see, the JCVI are watching to see the results of that and what the effects are, and that will inform later decision making by the JCVI over here. But at the moment, the scientists have decided it's not worth it. It's not worth vaccinating children on mass.
One of the arguments is that you'll be vaccinating children who are not at risk from coronavirus in order to protect other people who are, and that is the ethical. Some people have that as the ethical concern. But I've had a bunch of vaccinations in my life as a journalist going around the world, and some of them were to protect me. And some of them were to protect other people. For example, the reason that you get the rubella jab as a young girl is to protect your future children from having a problem with the rubella virus. I mean,
well, also
it passes on to your children. So we do protect other people by jabbing the kid. It does happen.
Well, also the children had 3 months off. Well, I can't remember if it was 3 months again, but weeks and weeks off school last spring to protect the vulnerable adults, to protect their grandmothers, to protect their people grandmothers, and they've screwed up their education, and that was an ethical decision that the government decided was worth it. So the government advisor is now taking a different ethical decision on, we won't put jabs in your arms to protect the older people. That, for me, seems a little bit odd when you've already taken an ethical decision to stop their education for weeks on end.
Vaccinating them actually protects their education. There's an argument for that as well. I think we'll probably end up doing it, but whether we're going to do it in time for Christmas, who knows? Now, Julian says, outdoor activities need a thorough rethink. Isn't it generally true that transmission rate... What are you drinking this time of the day?
That's my smoothie. It's breakfast.
That's not breakfast. Have a Weetabix. No. Isn't it generally true that transmission rates are about 100th of indoor rates? Ben, have you seen any science about that? It is much safer outside than inside, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know about that particular stat of 100th. It is much safer. Remember last summer, we, various newspapers, TV put pictures everywhere of packed beaches And then Chris Whitty later in the year said there's not one case of a coronavirus transmission attributed to a beach. It is much, much safer outdoors. Cannot stress that. I don't know about the 100th, but yes, fresh air, the ventilation is repeatedly stressed by government scientists, by ministers, experts, officials. They all say it is much better to be outdoors. So make the most of this good weather, get out and see people. Don't do it in your houses. Don't do it in inside pubs. You know, I went on a stag do on the weekend down in Cornwall, and we spent the vast majority of the time on the beach chatting. You can have your beers, have your ciders. We were outside. It was very, very low risk. That ventilation is very good at preventing corona.
Yeah, and it's one of the best days at school, or when the teacher says you can go outside and do your lessons on the grass. So, I mean, perfect opportunity. Now, Bal says, delete the useless app. Problem solved. Where to start, Bal? You don't have to have the app. I don't have the app. I didn't download it. And that's because I work at my desk and I don't see anybody outside my bubble for more than 15 minutes, really. So it's not worth, and when I do, it's outside. So it's not really worth my downloading an app so the government can follow this particular journalist around. I'd rather they didn't as well. If I was on a train regularly, if I was with other people regularly, I probably would have downloaded it. And you don't have to isolate if you're pinged by the app, but you do if you're told by test and trace, don't you, Ben? So there's this confusion as well that you can delete the app, you can ignore the app, but you can't ignore a request to isolate from the government.
That's right. You've got to be very clear on this. And the government minister, business minister, got in a fair bit of trouble yesterday for basically saying what is the truth. Now, in saying this is not something I recommend, not something the Daily Mirror recommends. It's just a fact that if you are pinged by the app, the NHS COVID-19 app, it is not legally required of you to isolate. You should, the government wants you to, but they can't do anything if you don't.
It's an issue of personal responsibility.
If you're contacted by NHS Test and Trace, so if they ring you up and they say you've been in close contact with someone who has tested positive for coronavirus, you must self-isolate. You must self-isolate. That is the law, and there are consequences if you don't. Now, like I say, in saying that, I'm not saying do not self-isolate if you're pinged by the app, and it is down to personal responsibility and it is choice, but it isn't the law.
Yeah, and that's perhaps why Boris Johnson was not going to self-isolate and then realised he had to, because social pressure actually made it necessary for him to do it, which it would be for just about any of us. And I would isolate if I got COVID, whether I got the app or not. Now, Mike says, good morning, Mike. Says, didn't the government say schools weren't a centre of infections, but now school holidays are a firebreak? Is that right? I can't remember. They did say something like the schools weren't a problem. It didn't matter if kids were transmitting the virus with a whole fresh mutation every time they pass it on.
I mean, there's been various things around schools. You remember class bubbles, wear masks in schools, don't wear masks in schools. It has changed. I mean, it's not necessarily that it's confusing, because the actual decisions have been clearly communicated, I think, at the time. What is confusing is the changing science behind it and the logic behind it. Because, as we've all said all the way through all this, Susie, it's an unprecedented situation. People are learning as they go along. And when we say people, I don't just mean me and Joe Public. I mean, Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, is learning as we go along. So Patrick Balance, the Chief Scientific Advisor, he is learning as we go along. That's by studying the data, studying the statistics and making decisions based on it. And they do evolve. The more people get it, the more we learn about it. And they change their minds based on the changing data. Quite often, and we do this, we accuse them of U-turns on this and U-turns on that, and isn't it confusing? Well, trying to stay on top of it can be confusing. It's not necessarily a bad thing to change your mind when the statistics change. If you shouldn't stick to bad advice just because you fear being accused of making a U-turn. If it's the best thing to do, you should do it.
Yeah, I think partly it's because in a crisis, a government or a country wants a strong leader, wants strong leadership, and we don't have a strong leader. We've got one who does what he's told. Now, Sarah Jane, morning, Sarah Jane says, "Can I ask a question?" Of course you can. It's what we're here for. My daughter is 7. She's vulnerable. She has epilepsy, heart disease, hypermobility, partially blind, and Noonan syndrome. Can a parent request that I can keep my child off if there's positives of COVID in another classroom? I would imagine this is down a little bit to the understanding of your child's head teacher, I would have thought, Sarah Jane. What about you, Ben? I mean, the law is you must send your child to school, but there's an awful lot of parents who won't.
Yeah, straight answer is, Sarah, I don't know. I won't lie to you about that. When you say, can a parent request that I keep my child off, does that mean another
Another
parent at the
parent.
school has asked you to keep your daughter away from school? I would assume, and it is only an assumption, that the answer to that is no. It's a decision for you to keep to whether or not you take your child to school. Obviously, the law is you should, unless it's a particularly good reason. And like Susie says, it's really a question for you and the headmaster or the headmistress
My
to
assumption
decide.
from Sarah Jane's question is that she's asking whether she can ask if she can keep her child off, because there's no particular reason that another parent would think her daughter is likely to give infection to others. It's more likely that your daughter's 7 there is going to suffer if you catch the virus. I think as there's only a few days left of term. Yes, can you decide? There you go. There's only a few days left of term, and if your daughter's health problems are obviously something the school must know about and be catering for, I would imagine you can have a conversation with the head teacher and go, look, can we just have some work to do at home for the next couple of days? Because I want her home, please.
I don't think there's a legal right. I don't think there's a legal right to keep your child off school, but a proper, sensible, pragmatic conversation with the head teacher hopefully would arrive at a sensible, pragmatic decision that works for you and your daughter.
Exactly. Sorry, I had a phone call in the middle of that. Now, we're going to go on to some other questions, some other stories now, but keep asking us your questions. How do you feel about the kids being off school? Are you happy about it? What about the breakdown of law and order with parents not necessarily sending their children to school when they are supposed to? Get into the comments and let us know. But speaking of idiots running the country, last night we were treated to a solid hour of not being able to hear what Dominic Cummings had to say about his time in Downing Street, because he had his hand over his mouth throughout, which is a classic sign of someone who's a bit nervous and doesn't want you to necessarily hear what he's saying. The few times he took his hand away and appeared to be telling the truth, therefore, as a result, we learned that he at no point thought Boris Johnson would make a good prime minister, either before, during or after the general election or his bid for the leadership. Nor he thought she'd be running the country. And he was just there to get Brexit done, which Dom now says may not have been a good idea anyway. Now, Ben, aside from the fact that it looks this morning like Brexit's collapsing again, does last night going to make any difference whatsoever to Cummings' declared plan of replacing the Prime Minister with someone else or destroying the Tory party or any other of his big grand schemes? Does it change it?
No, it doesn't. The problem is Dominic Cummings is not a reliable witness. He briefs left, right, and centre, says different things, and now, since leaving Downing Street in November last year, after losing this power struggle with Prime Minister's then girlfriend Carrie Symonds, now his wife, obviously, he's fired off various attacks on Twitter. Then there was the epic 7.5-hour performance in front of the joint select committees for the Health Select Committee and the Science Select Committee of Parliament. And now this sit-down interview with the BBC. Every attack that he makes on the Prime Minister, and it's not to say they're not valid, but every attack he makes on the Prime Minister, it's diminished by the next one he makes. Like, if you only say something once and it's hard-hitting...
It's Harry and the Royals.
Yeah, exactly. It's just saying the same things, and you've got to try ever harder to make news. If you do it once, drop the mic, walk off, it's brilliant. If you just keep going on and on and on, you come to resemble ever more that person who's gone very far off the reservation.
That madman lives by the dustbins. That's what you start.
Yeah, you want to say to Dom, mate, get a hobby, go for a walk or something, maybe go for a drive. You do want to. You've got to do something other than just become totally fixated on this. And the other thing, no one likes sore losers, do they? If you fight and you lose, you've got to walk away and say, oh well, I've lost. But just to keep going on and on about it, it's a bit sad and pathetic, to be honest. I mean, the other thing that's interesting in this is, what is he hoping to gain out of this? Is he hoping to elicit public sympathy? Because he ain't going to get it. No. And also, he's basically saying he wanted to launch a coup from inside Number 10 against the democratically elected Prime Minister. Now, leave aside that the democratically elected Prime Minister is Boris Johnson. This is an advisor. He's an official, paid 140 grand, I think it was, of our money. And from what we now are told, he was working to undermine that Prime Minister from within. And that is a coup. That is an insurrection.
And within a fortnight of him winning an 80-seat majority, of helping him to win that majority as well.
Yeah, and it has to do as well. Dom and Boris spent quite a lot of time together during the 2016 Brexit referendum campaign. He did know his character. Nobody, people who voted Boris Johnson into office in 2019 with an 80-seat majority, it's an election landslide. They did so knowing full well what they were getting. You know, cannot say you were not warned, people. Like, you know, all the character flaws were there for all to see, and that includes they were there for Dominic Cummings to see closer up than the rest of us did. Now, if he's just saying, as he seems to be, that he was using Boris Johnson as a vessel to drive through Brexit, well, okay, well, that's your choice, isn't it? But then don't complain when he turns out in office in number 10 to be what everyone thought he was. Like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. The two things that I really hated about last night was, firstly, the way that he smiled and laughed whenever Laura Kuenssberg was raising some of those issues which convinced people to vote for Brexit and later on for Boris, about the 350 million to the NHS and Turkey joining the EU, which we knew at the time was wrong. Dominic Cummings knew at the time was wrong, and that if you're being fairly decent, no matter what side of the argument you're on, you shouldn't really have said in quite the way it was. But he said it in order to wind up the other side and to start the culture war and the division and stop people actually dealing with some of the other issues. And he laughed at that because he was getting a kick that people were still angry at his, you know, his big design. He was still feeling important 5 years on, people still going on about it. And the second thing was, if you think the Prime Minister is no damn good at being a Prime Minister, why don't you apologise? That's all he had to do to get public sympathy last night, was to say, I'm sorry I got this man into Downing Street because he's killed people. And he's never once said that. He said he's killed people. He said shouldn't be there, he shouldn't be doing the job. But he has never expressed regret or remorse for foisting him upon us.
Yeah,
and taken.
Like I said, it is really hard to see, other than revenge, right, which is quite a powerful motivator, I suspect. But other than revenge, what is he getting out of it? Like, he doesn't particularly like the public exposure, as far as we know. Yet he does an hour-long sit-down interview with the most important political journalist in the country. So I think it is vengeful, and this works to number 10's favour because they are just able to brush it off and go, Prime Minister's getting on with the job. You know, they don't. It's not that they don't care; it's that they don't need to react to it. And the public already made its mind up about Dominic Cummings last May when he made that trip to Barnard Castle and to County Durham. They've decided what they make of him. Just because some people, he's now saying what some people thought all along. You know, well, the British public has every right to say, "Well, I told you so." But who are you to say this? You're the unreliable witness. You lack all credibility.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't think it'll make any difference. And number 10 are not that bothered about it at all.
No. Well, the thing that I think probably that may do for Johnson in the long run is that what Cummings did show last night is that Boris Johnson doesn't have a plan. We all knew that anyway. Doesn't have any principles, doesn't have any guiding star that he follows apart from his own self-preservation. And that makes him a weak Prime Minister. You know, a strong Prime Minister leads a team who are all doing different things but has a vision of some sort. And a weak one is led by his team or his girlfriend or whoever is nearest to him. And that appears to be what Boris Johnson's problem is. He's led by whoever is around him. If the people around him are good, then that's not too bad. If people around him are evil, then they're going to do bad, stupid, ignorant things. And he's only promoted sort of lickspittles and, you know, the grade B politicians who do exactly as he tells them to, which I think is going to undermine him in the long run, but that's just my prediction. But now we do have some good news that has come out of despite everything that's happened in the last 24 hours, and here it is. Now, 60 years ago, Lynn and Bert Willis from Cleethorpes were in trouble. He was 17, she was 15, and she was also 6 months pregnant. To most of us, that would seem like a bit of a pickle. And their parents insisted the young lovebirds get married on Lynn's 16th birthday, and she was 7 months pregnant. Her mum refused to even come to the wedding because she was so ashamed. But that was 1961, and they've just celebrated their diamond wedding. There we are at the bottom, happy as Larry. 6 decades of marriage, Ben. I suppose it shows that shotgun weddings do work after all.
Yeah, it's quite a sweet story, this. Yeah, I remember when I was on local papers doing golden wedding anniversaries, and very rarely did we do diamond wedding anniversaries because essentially people didn't often live that long. Lynn and Bert, because they got married so young, 16 and 17, they are, as the piece makes clear, one of Britain's youngest couples to celebrate a diamond wedding. So yeah, they got married under circumstances that perhaps they weren't perfect. It was not how they dreamt it, but she got pregnant. He was like, better get married then. And yeah, 16 and 17 years old. And they've gone on to have, I think the piece says, how many is it? 5 children, 8 grandchildren, and eight great grandchildren. So it's worked out all right for Lynn and Bert. I mean, I know this is the good news section. What we don't do is about all the shotgun weddings that didn't necessarily work out quite well. All the ones that got divorced after a couple of years.
There is that, I think, argument, yeah, of just marrying someone you don't know very well. But, Lynn's mum, perhaps if she was still alive, might be quite chuffed at the way it turned out and think it was probably all for the best. And there's a lovely, sweet comment in there. Bert says that she looks just as beautiful as the first day I saw her. And she noticed him because he was always staring at her over the school wall and wouldn't look away. So, Bert's
a charmer, isn't he?
It shows that he's learned to say the right thing at the right time. Yeah. After 60 years, it's probably about time. Now, a few more questions before we move on and wind up. Now, Paula says, who thinks during the school holidays classrooms should be fitted with carbon dioxide monitors and air purification systems? The government needs to support these measures. No mitigation in school, clearly, until it's working. The problem with that is that it's going to cost tens of thousands of pounds per school, Ben, isn't it? And as soon as they don't want to feed hungry children, the chances of them putting in air when they've got windows is slim.
Yeah, I mean, retrofitting air purification systems to every school in the country would be quite expensive. Billions, I'd have thought. I mean, it would work, probably, but it would be very expensive, and infrastructure-wise, of course, you'd have to move all the kids out anyway whilst you're doing it. It's not a job you can do every school in the 6-week summer holidays.
No, exactly. And if some air sort of transport, ventilation systems, air conditioning stuff might even collect coronavirus in some of the filters, who knows? And Glynis says, do children with autism get vaccinated? They're at risk. I believe, Ben, that there are some categories of mental disability that do get higher category vaccination. So would children with autism qualify, do you think?
I don't know. Another one to ask your doctor, I'm afraid. I don't want to speculate on that because I simply don't know the answer.
No. I think adults with autism do get a priority jab. So ask your doctor, because a child with autism should be likewise classed as vulnerable. So it's possible. Ask your doctor is the best time. Now, Michelle says, what's the point if the jab don't stop it? Michelle, the jab does stop it. It stops people dying. It stops people going to hospital quite as much. It stops people transmitting it quite as much. And if you check the death rates compared to last year when there was no jab, it's a 100th or a 10th of what they were. The rates have dropped massively of deaths and hospitalizations, haven't they, Ben?
Yeah, if you look at one of Chris Whitty's, next slide, please, graphs, you'll see the correlation, the lines between number of infections and then the number of people going to hospital and the number of people dying. The number of people getting infected is going up really high. But then when you overlay what happened last March and April and January and February of this year, the bit about people going to hospital and the bit about death, you can see totally where the vaccines have worked, where they are massively limiting the number of people getting seriously ill and hugely curbing the number of people who are dying. So they do work. No one ever said they'll 100% stop you getting infected. You know, it stops you dying, it stops you getting seriously ill, and it lessens the chance of you catching it. So they do work.
Yeah, and Michelle appears to think so, because judging by her avatar there, she's fully vaccinated. So well done, Michelle. And yes, it can still cause some problems, but they are much, much less. Unfortunately, our NHS is in such a state after 11 years of Tory misrule that a few problems can be enough to topple it over. So we all need to be careful during the summer holidays. Thank you for joining me, Ben. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Join us again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. And on the Wednesdays during the school holidays, we'll be on at the slightly later time of 9:30. But we'll see you all next Monday at the normal time, 9 o'clock. And we'll see where we are then, won't we? Bye-bye.